The general store smelled of sawdust and sugar when Virginia Carter walked through the door that September afternoon in 1883. Her worn boots barely making a sound against the wooden planks of Randsburg, California. She carried herself with dignity despite the threadbare calico dress that hung a bit too loose on her slender frame, her dark hair pinned back in a simple bun that had seen better days. The coins in her palm had been counted 3 times already before she even left the small cabin she rented at the edge of town. But she counted them again anyway, her fingers trembling slightly as she approached the counter where loaves of bread sat in a neat row. Thomas Turner had been loading supplies onto his wagon outside when he first noticed her through the dusty window. Something about the careful way she moved, the precise counting of those copper pennies, made him pause mid-motion with a 50-pound sack of flour still balanced on his shoulder. He was a tall man, weathered by years of working cattle drives and managing his modest ranch in the hills above town, with sun-bleached brown hair and the kind of blue eyes that had witnessed both the cruelty and kindness the West had to offer. At 28, he had learned to read people quickly, and what he saw in this woman's face was not laziness or foolishness, but the quiet desperation of someone trying to survive with dignity intact. "That will be 8 cents, miss," Mr. Henderson said from behind the counter, his tone neutral but not unkind. The old shopkeeper had seen plenty of hard times himself. Virginia counted the pennies again, her lips moving silently. 7 cents. She had 7 cents. Her heart sank, but she kept her chin up. "I apologize, Mr. Henderson. I miscounted at home. I only have 7 cents. Could I possibly pay you the remainder on Friday when I finish Mrs. Patterson's sewing?" Thomas watched Henderson's face soften with pity, and something in his chest tightened. He had seen that look before, had been on the receiving end of it himself years ago when his father's ranch went under after a harsh winter killed half their herd. Pity was sometimes necessary, but it always came with a price to one's pride. "Now, miss, you know I cannot do that," Henderson began, not unkindly. "I've got bills to pay myself, and if I started extending credit to everyone who asked—" "I understand completely," Virginia interrupted, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. "Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, and Thomas made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. He finished loading the flour sack, dusted off his hands, and walked into the store with the kind of purposeful stride that came from years of making difficult choices and living with them. "Henderson, add that loaf to my order," he said, his voice casual as he approached the counter. "And I will need a few more items as well." Virginia had frozen near the door, her back still turned. "Sir, I cannot accept charity." Thomas did not look at her directly. Instead, he began listing items to Henderson, his tone suggesting this was purely business. 2 more loaves of bread, a sack of cornmeal, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, dried apples, and whatever vegetables you have that are still fresh. "Mr. Turner, that is quite a lot," Henderson said, his eyebrows raising slightly. "My housekeeper quit last week," Thomas said smoothly, the lie coming easier than he expected. "Ran off to San Francisco with a traveling salesman, left my cupboards in complete disarray. I cannot tell what I have and what I need, so I figure it is better to have too much than too little." It was not entirely convincing, and all 3 of them knew it, but Thomas's tone suggested he would not appreciate being questioned. Henderson began gathering the items while Virginia finally turned around, her gray eyes meeting Thomas's for the first time. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "I am not doing anything except buying groceries," he replied, finally looking at her directly. "Though I do have a wagon outside and these supplies are heavy. If you happen to be walking in the direction of the edge of town, I would not object to the company." She studied him for a long moment, and Thomas wondered what she saw. He was not the handsomest man in Randsburg, his nose having been broken twice and his hands scarred from years of ranch work. But he kept himself clean, treated people fairly, and had built his small ranch from nothing after his father's death 5 years prior. It was not much, but it was honest. "I live in the cabin past the old Miller place," she said finally. "I know it," Thomas replied. "I pass by there on my way home." The transaction was completed in silence, Henderson's knowing look ignored by both parties. Thomas loaded the supplies into his wagon while Virginia stood awkwardly nearby, clearly torn between gratitude and the discomfort of accepting help. The afternoon sun beat down on Randsburg's Main Street, turning the desert dust golden and making the distant hills shimmer with heat. "I should explain," Virginia said once they were moving, the wagon creaking beneath them as Thomas's horses plodded forward. "I am not usually in such circumstances. I came here 6 months ago after my father passed. He had claimed there was family inheritance waiting, but when I arrived, I discovered he had been mistaken, or perhaps desperate enough to believe his own wishful thinking. I have been doing sewing and mending for the ladies in town, but work has been slow." "You do not owe me an explanation," Thomas said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "Perhaps not, but I feel the need to give one anyway." She folded her hands in her lap. "I do not wish you to think I make a habit of accepting assistance from strangers." "I do not think that at all," he said honestly. "I think you are someone who has had some bad luck and is trying her best to manage with dignity. There is no shame in that." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds being the wagon wheels and the occasional snort from one of the horses. Randsburg was a small mining town, built on hopes of silver and copper that had not quite panned out as expected. Most residents were either miners hoping for a strike, merchants serving those miners, or ranchers like Thomas who worked the surrounding lands. It was a hard life, but an honest one. "Why did you help me?" Virginia asked suddenly. "You do not know me." Thomas considered the question carefully. "When I was 23, my father died and left me with a failing ranch, more debt than assets, and a younger sister to support. A neighbor, old Mr. Chen, brought by supplies one day. Said he had over-ordered and would I please take the extras so they did not go to waste in his barn. It was a lie, of course. He had spent his own money to help us. I tried to refuse, and he said something I have never forgotten." Thomas paused, guiding the horses around a rough patch in the road. "He said that accepting help with grace is sometimes harder than offering it, but both are necessary for a community to survive. He said that someday I would be in a position to help someone else, and when that day came, I should remember how it felt to need assistance." "That is beautiful," Virginia said softly. "What happened to your sister? Married a banker in Sacramento 2 years ago. Has a baby daughter now. Wrote me last month saying she is the happiest she has ever been." Thomas smiled slightly. "Mr. Chen came to the wedding, said he was proud of us both, and the ranch," turned it around slowly. "I have about 300 head of cattle now, enough grazing land to support them, and I make enough to live comfortably, if not lavishly." He glanced at her. "It took 3 years of back-breaking work and more than a few nights wondering if I had made the right choices, but we survived." Virginia's cabin came into view, a small structure that had clearly seen better days. The roof sagged slightly on one side, and the wood needed fresh paint, but she had made efforts to improve it. A small garden plot showed recent tending, though the desert climate made growing anything a challenge. Wildflowers in a tin can sat on the windowsill. "I will help you bring everything inside," Thomas said, climbing down from the wagon before she could protest. The interior of the cabin was sparse but clean. A single room served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space, with a small iron stove in one corner and a narrow bed in another. A sewing basket overflowing with fabric scraps sat near the window, evidence of her work. Thomas tried not to notice the nearly empty cupboard as he began unloading supplies, but Virginia caught his expression. "It looks worse than it is," she said. Though they both knew that was not true, they worked in silence, filling the cupboard with the food he had purchased. When everything was stored away, Thomas turned to find Virginia standing in the center of the room, tears streaming silently down her face. She wiped at them quickly, embarrassed. "I apologize," she said. "I have been trying so hard to manage, and I suppose the relief of having food again is overwhelming." Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" She did not answer, which was answer enough. "I have a standing arrangement with the boarding house," he said carefully. "I pay for my meals in advance every month, but this month I accidentally paid double. I spoke with Mrs. Wu about it, and she said she cannot refund the money, but I could bring a guest any time I wanted until the credit is used up. Would you do me the favor of joining me for dinner this evening so that money is not wasted?" It was another transparent fiction, and Virginia looked at him with eyes that saw right through it. But she also saw something else, something in his face that was not pity but genuine concern, and perhaps something more tentative that neither of them was ready to name yet. "You are a terrible liar, Mr. Turner," she said, but there was the ghost of a smile on her lips. "Thomas," he corrected. "And yes, I am. But I am also hungry and I dislike eating alone, and Mrs. Wu makes the best pot roast in 3 counties. So will you join me, Virginia?" she replied. "And yes, I will, though I must insist this is the last time I accept such kindness without being able to repay it." "Fair enough," Thomas agreed, though he was already planning how to ensure it would not be the last time at all. Mrs. Wu's boarding house was the largest building in Randsburg aside from the mine offices, a 2-story structure that served meals to boarders and townspeople alike. The dining room was half full when Thomas and Virginia arrived, and Thomas did not miss the curious glances from other diners. In a town this small, gossip spread faster than wildfire. "Mr. Turner, so good to see you," Mrs. Wu said warmly, her sharp eyes taking in Virginia with obvious interest. "And you have brought a guest." "This is Miss Virginia Carter," Thomas said. "Virginia, Mrs. Wu runs the finest establishment in town. Flattery will not get you extra helpings," Mrs. Wu said, but she was smiling. "Though for your lovely companion I might make an exception. Please sit." The meal was indeed as good as Thomas had promised. Pot roast with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Virginia ate slowly at first, clearly trying to maintain propriety, but Thomas noticed her plate was cleaned thoroughly. Color returned to her cheeks as the meal progressed, and he realized just how beautiful she was when not weighed down by hunger and worry. Her eyes were intelligent and kind, her hands graceful despite the calluses from sewing work. "How did you learn to sew?" he asked over coffee. "My mother taught me," Virginia said. "She was a seamstress in Boston before she married my father. After she died when I was 12, sewing became my way of staying connected to her memory. I made all my own clothes, then started taking in work for neighbors. I had hoped to open a proper dress shop someday, but circumstances have not aligned for that dream." "Why did your father come west?" Virginia's expression grew complicated. "He was always chasing something better. A new opportunity, a fresh start, a fortune just around the corner. We moved 7 times in the 10 years after my mother died. He was not a bad man, just a restless one who could never quite settle. When he wrote me about California, about the inheritance from a distant cousin, I think part of him truly believed it. He wanted to believe it. But there was nothing, Thomas said gently. There was a grave, Virginia corrected. The cousin had died 3 years earlier, and whatever small estate he had was long since settled and distributed to other relatives. I arrived to find my father had died 2 weeks before I got here, and I had exactly $23 to my name. I rented the cabin because it was cheap, and I have been trying to establish myself as a seamstress ever since. 6 months is not very long to build a reputation in a new town, Thomas observed. No, but food does not wait for reputations to be established. She met his eyes. I am not telling you this to garner sympathy. I simply want you to understand that I am doing everything I can to manage on my own. Your kindness today was more than I can properly express, but I cannot allow myself to become dependent on anyone's charity. What if it is not charity? Thomas asked. What do you mean? He had not planned to say it, had not even fully formed the thought until this moment, but suddenly it seemed perfectly clear. I was not entirely lying about needing help at the ranch. My housekeeper did quit, though it was 2 months ago, not last week. I have been managing on my own, but the house is a disaster, and I spend more time trying to figure out meals than I do working with the cattle. I could genuinely use someone to help with cooking, cleaning, mending, that sort of thing. I could pay a fair wage. Virginia studied him carefully. Thomas, I appreciate the offer, but we both know you are inventing this position because you feel sorry for me. I am inventing it because I saw a woman who has skills I need, and I have resources she needs, and it seems foolish for both of us to struggle independently when we could help each other. He leaned forward slightly. Virginia, I am offering you employment, not charity. You would earn every penny. My ranch house has not been properly cleaned in 2 months. My clothes need mending. I have been eating beans and hardtack for weeks because I cannot cook worth a damn. This would be a legitimate job. She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her turning the idea over in her mind, examining it from every angle, looking for the trap or the hidden cost. Finally, she said, "What are the terms?" "Come out 6 days a week," Thomas said, working it out as he spoke. "I will collect you in the morning, bring you to the ranch, and take you home before dark. You handle the house, the cooking, the mending, whatever needs doing. I will pay you $3 a week plus meals while you are working." "That is too much," Virginia said immediately. "It is exactly what I paid Mrs. Jennings, and she did half the work you would do because she was 70 years old and her hands were crippled with arthritis." He held up a hand before she could protest. "Try it for 2 weeks. If at the end of that time you feel it is not a fair arrangement, we will renegotiate, but give it a chance." Virginia bit her lip, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Finally, practicality won. 2 weeks, she agreed, but I keep my sewing work for the other ladies in town as well. I will not abandon commitments I have already made. I would not ask you to, Thomas assured her. You can bring your sewing to the ranch if you like. Work on it during slow times. They shook hands across the table, and Thomas felt the warmth of her palm against his, the slight tremor that suggested she was nervous but determined. Something shifted in that moment, something neither of them acknowledged but both felt. This was more than just an employment arrangement. Though neither was ready to examine what else it might be the next morning, Thomas collected Virginia at dawn, and she saw his ranch properly for the first time. It was situated in a small valley in the hills above Randsburg, with a creek running through it that provided precious water year-round. The house was a solid structure of wood and stone, larger than she had expected, with a wide porch and windows that faced the morning sun. The barn was well maintained, and she could see cattle dotting the hillsides beyond. "It is beautiful," she said honestly as they approached. "My father built the original house," Thomas explained. "I added on 3 years ago when I finally had the money. Probably built it bigger than necessary for just me, but I suppose I was optimistic about the future." The interior confirmed his claims about needing help. Dishes were piled in the sink, dust covered most surfaces, and his idea of organizing seemed to involve putting things wherever there was space. But the bones of the house were good, with solid furniture and large windows that let in plenty of light. "Lord have mercy," Virginia muttered, then caught herself. "I apologize, I mean this will take some work." "I warned you," Thomas said, looking somewhat embarrassed. "I am much better with cattle than housekeeping. Where should I start?" "Wherever you think best. I will be working with the herd today, checking on some new calves and repairing fence line. Come find me if you need anything." He left her to it, and Virginia rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She started with the kitchen, heating water and tackling the dishes, then moved through the house room by room. It was strangely satisfying work, bringing order to chaos, and she found herself humming as she cleaned. The house had good bones and better potential. She could see ways to arrange things more efficiently, places where a woman's touch would make it feel more like a home and less like a place where a man simply slept between work days. At noon, Thomas returned to find the kitchen transformed and something that smelled incredible simmering on the stove. "You made lunch?" he asked, surprised. "You hired me to cook, did you not?" Virginia replied, ladling stew into bowls. She had found vegetables in the root cellar, along with preserved meat and herbs. "I hope you do not mind that I explored a bit to find ingredients." "Mind? Virginia, this is amazing." He sat down and took a bite, his eyes widening. "This is really amazing." She smiled, and he realized it was the first genuine smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, chasing away the worry and revealing the spirited woman beneath the struggling circumstances. They fell into a routine over the following days. Thomas would collect Virginia each morning. She would work at the ranch while he tended his cattle, and they would share lunch and dinner together before he took her home. The house slowly transformed under her care, becoming warmer and more welcoming. She mended his clothes, organized his chaotic storage, and filled the house with cooking smells that reminded him of better times. But more than the improved house, Thomas found himself looking forward to their conversations. Virginia was intelligent and well-read, with opinions on everything from politics to poetry. She had a sharp wit that caught him off guard, and a kindness that showed in how she treated everything from his cattle to the wild rabbits that sometimes appeared near the house. "You are spoiling them," he said one afternoon, watching her scatter vegetable scraps for a family of rabbits. "They are hungry," she replied simply. "I know what that feels like." 2 weeks passed, then 3, then a month. Neither of them brought up renegotiating the arrangement. Virginia seemed to bloom under regular meals and meaningful work, the hollowness leaving her cheeks and the worry fading from her eyes. She brought her sewing to the ranch as promised, working on dresses for town ladies during the afternoon lulls, and Thomas found himself inventing reasons to come back to the house during the day just to see her. It was Mrs. Wu who finally forced Thomas to examine what was happening. He had come into town for supplies one October afternoon when she pulled him aside. "That girl is falling in love with you," Mrs. Wu said bluntly. Thomas nearly dropped the bag of flour he was holding. "What? No, she is just my housekeeper. And you are just an employer who looks at her like she hung the moon and stars." Mrs. Wu's expression was knowing. "I have run this boarding house for 20 years, Mr. Turner. I recognize the signs. The question is, What are you going to do about it?" "I do not know what you mean," Thomas said weakly. "Yes, you do. You are falling for her just as hard as she is falling for you, but neither of you will admit it because she is worried about seeming obligated to you, and you are worried about taking advantage of someone in your employ." Mrs. Wu poked him in the chest with one finger. "Life is short, Mr. Turner, especially out here. Do not waste time pretending you do not care for her." Thomas drove back to the ranch in a daze, Mrs. Wu's words echoing in his mind. Was it true? He thought about how his heart lifted every morning when he saw Virginia waiting by her cabin, how he had started wearing his better shirts and making sure his hair was combed, how meals together had become the highlight of his day, and how empty the house felt on Sundays when she did not come. He was in love with her. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it felt like something settling into place. A piece of his life he had not known was missing until it appeared. The question was what to do about it. Virginia was kneading bread when he returned, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. Flour dusted her cheeks and a strand of hair had escaped her bun. She looked up when he entered, smiling. "You are back early. Is everything all right?" "Virginia, we need to talk," he said, then winced at how ominous that sounded. "Not about anything bad, at least I hope it is not bad." She wiped her hands on her apron, looking concerned. "What is it?" Now that the moment was here, Thomas found himself floundering for words. He had faced down stampeding cattle and broken wild horses, but this terrified him in a way physical danger never had. "I have not been entirely honest with you," he began, "about why I offered you this job." Virginia's face fell slightly. "I see. No, you do not. Let me explain." He took a breath. "Yes, I genuinely needed help around the house. And yes, you have done excellent work, better than I could have hoped for. But Mrs. Wu said something to me today that made me realize I have been lying to myself as much as to you." "What did she say?" "She said I was falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush. "And she was right. I am. I have been since that first day in the general store, maybe even since I saw you through the window counting those pennies. And I know this is complicated because you work for me, and you might feel obligated, but I need you to know it is not conditional. Your job is not dependent on returning my feelings. You can tell me you do not feel the same way, and tomorrow morning I will still come collect you, and nothing will change except I will stop pretending my heart does not race every time you smile." Virginia stared at him, her gray eyes wide. For a long moment she said nothing, and Thomas felt his heart sinking. Then tears began to slide down her cheeks, leaving tracks in the flour dust. "Oh no," Thomas said miserably. "I have upset you. I am so sorry. Please forget I said anything." "You are such an idiot," Virginia said, but she was laughing through her tears. "Thomas Turner, I have been in love with you since you invented that ridiculous lie about your housekeeper quitting. You are the worst liar I have ever met, and the kindest man I have ever known, and I have spent the last month trying not to feel this way because I was so afraid it would ruin everything." "You love me?" Thomas asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I love you," she confirmed. "I love your terrible housekeeping and your thoughtfulness, and the way you talk to your cattle like they are your friends. I love that you helped me without making me feel small. I love that you see me as more than my circumstances. I love you." He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, not caring about the flour that transferred to his shirt. She melted against him, and when he kissed her, she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past month. It was clumsy and perfect, tasting of salt from her tears and hope for the future. "Marry me," Thomas said when they finally broke apart. "That is very sudden," Virginia replied, but she was smiling. "We have known each other 6 weeks. If anything, I am moving too slowly." He cupped her face in his hands. "Virginia, I do not want you to be my housekeeper. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life together, a real partnership where we face whatever comes as equals. I want everything with you." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Randsburg. Virginia wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Thomas insisted on purchasing, a beautiful blue that matched the California sky. Mrs. Wu hosted the reception at the boarding house, and it seemed like the entire town turned out to celebrate. Even Mr. Henderson from the general store gave them a gift, a set of fine china with a note that read, "For counting blessings instead of pennies." The first year of marriage was not without challenges. Virginia continued her sewing work, building a reputation that extended beyond Randsburg to neighboring towns. Thomas expanded his herd, and together they weathered a difficult winter and a dry spring. But they weathered it together, making decisions jointly, supporting each other through difficulties. Virginia proved to have a good head for business, keeping careful accounts and suggesting improvements to ranch operations that Thomas would never have considered. She pointed out that they could charge more for cattle if they were better fed, and worked with him to improve their grazing rotation. She also noticed that several ranchers in the area were struggling to find good breeding stock, and suggested Thomas might diversify into selling breeding bulls along with beef cattle. "You are brilliant," Thomas said one evening after she had shown him her calculations on potential profit margins. "I am practical," Virginia corrected. "And I like knowing we are building something secure. I never want to count pennies for bread again, and I never want anyone else to have to either." That practicality combined with compassion became a hallmark of their marriage. When they learned that the widow Ferguson was struggling after her husband's death, Virginia organized the town women to help with harvesting her crops, while Thomas and other ranchers pitched in with heavy labor. When a fire destroyed the Chen family's barn, the Turners were first to offer assistance and materials to rebuild. "You are following Mr. Chen's advice," Virginia observed as they drove home from helping with the barn raising. "Passing along the help we received," Thomas agreed. "It is what keeps a community alive." Their first child arrived in the autumn of 1885, a squalling red-faced boy they named James after Thomas's father. Virginia proved as capable a mother as she was a wife and businesswoman, though she laughed that motherhood was far more exhausting than any of her other roles. "He has your determination," Thomas said one sleepless night as she nursed the baby. "And your appetite," Virginia replied, but she was smiling down at their son with such love that Thomas's heart ached with happiness. As James grew from baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas's gamble on breeding stock paid off handsomely, and Virginia's sewing had evolved into a legitimate business. She had hired 2 young women from town to help with basic mending, while she focused on custom dressmaking for wealthier clients as far away as San Francisco. "I am thinking of opening an actual shop in town," she mentioned one evening as they sat on the porch watching James play with a wooden horse Thomas had carved. "Mrs. Peterson has offered to rent me the space above her millinery." "That would mean more time away from the ranch," Thomas observed. "Would you be happy with that?" Virginia considered the question carefully. "I would miss being here every day, but I think I could manage both if I organized properly, and it would mean more income, more security." "We have plenty of security," Thomas said gently. "You do not have to prove anything." "I know." She leaned against his shoulder. "But I want to build something of my own too. Not because I do not value what we have built together, but because I remember what it felt like to have nothing. I never want to be that vulnerable again." Thomas understood. The memory of her counting pennies in the general store would probably stay with both of them forever, a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change. Then open the shop. I support you completely. The dress shop opened the following spring and became an immediate success. Virginia had an eye for style and a talent for understanding what her clients wanted, even when they could not articulate it themselves. She employed 4 seamstresses within the first year and was considering expanding into a larger space. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, arrived in 1887. Unlike her boisterous brother, Rose was a quiet, contemplative baby who seemed to observe the world with serious eyes. Virginia juggled motherhood and business with the same practical determination she brought to everything, while Thomas managed the ranch and did his share of parenting. "We make a good team," Virginia said one evening after they had finally gotten both children to sleep. "The best team," Thomas agreed, pulling her close. "Though I cannot help remembering that this all started because you were a penny short for a loaf of bread. And you were a terrible liar who claimed his housekeeper ran off with a salesman." She laughed softly. "We have come a long way." "We have," he agreed. "And we still have so much further to go." Those words proved prophetic. Over the next decade, the Turner Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Virginia's dress shop expanded into 3 locations, employing over a dozen seamstresses and serving clients throughout California. They had 2 more children, twin boys born in 1890, who kept everyone on their toes with their energetic antics. But success did not change the core of who they were. Thomas still remembered what it felt like to struggle, and Virginia never forgot counting pennies in a dusty general store. They continued to help their neighbors, to contribute to the community, to build something larger than themselves. When Mr. Chen passed away in 1893, Thomas and Virginia stood at his funeral with tears streaming down their faces. They had visited him regularly over the years, bringing their children to meet the man whose kindness had set Thomas on a path that eventually led to Virginia. At the reception after the service, Mr. Chen's son approached them. "My father wanted you to have something," he said, handing Thomas a small wooden box. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Thomas opened it carefully and found a receipt from 10 years earlier, a bill of sale for the supplies Mr. Chen had brought to Thomas's failing ranch. At the bottom, in Mr. Chen's careful handwriting, were the words, "Paid in full through kindness passed forward." "He kept this?" Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. "He said it reminded him why we are here," Chen's son replied. "Not just to survive, but to help each other thrive. He said you understood that lesson better than anyone he knew." That night, Thomas and Virginia sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the hills that had become home. Their children were asleep inside, the ranch was quiet, and the world felt at peace. "You ever think about that day in the general store?" Thomas asked. "Every day," Virginia admitted. "Not with sadness anymore, but with gratitude. I was at my lowest point and you saw me, not as a charity case or someone to pity, but as a person worth knowing, worth loving." "You were always worth loving," Thomas said firmly. "I just had the good fortune to recognize it." "We were both fortunate," Virginia corrected. "I could have been too proud to accept your help. You could have been the kind of man who wanted something in return. But instead, we found each other at exactly the right moment." "Do you think Mr. Chen was right?" Thomas asked. "About kindness being repaid through passing it forward?" "I think we have spent the last 10 years proving he was right," Virginia replied. "Every person we have helped, every hand we have extended, every time we chose compassion over indifference, we have been repaying what you received from him and what I received from you." As the years continued to unfold, the Turner family became a cornerstone of Randsburg. James grew into a thoughtful young man who showed a talent for managing cattle. Rose became a skilled seamstress who worked alongside her mother, bringing fresh ideas to the dress shop business. The twins, as different as night and day despite their shared birthday, found their own paths with their parents' full support. In 1898, on their 15th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Virginia with a gift. He led her out to the barn where a beautifully restored wagon sat waiting, its wood polished and its wheels new. "You recognize it?" he asked. Virginia walked around it slowly, then gasped. "This is the wagon from that first day when you drove me home from town. The same one. I kept it all these years, even after I bought new ones. I could never bring myself to get rid of it because it reminded me of the day my life truly began." He took her hands. "Virginia, you have given me 15 years of happiness I never dreamed possible. You have made me a better man, a better father, a better member of this community. I wanted to restore this wagon as a reminder that the best things in life often start with a simple act of kindness." Virginia was crying openly now, not from sadness but from overwhelming love. "Thomas Turner, you walked into a general store 15 years ago and changed my entire world. You gave me food when I was hungry, work when I was desperate, and love when I thought I would never have it. You have been my partner, my best friend, my home. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." They kissed there in the barn, surrounded by hay and sunlight and memories, and it felt like coming full circle. From desperation to abundance, from strangers to soulmates, from counting pennies to building an empire, they had walked every step together. Their story became something of a legend in Randsburg. Young couples would ask them for advice, and Thomas and Virginia always gave the same answer. Treat each other with kindness, work as a team, and never forget where you came from. They spoke at the church sometimes, telling the story of how they met, and Virginia was never embarrassed to admit she had been counting pennies for bread that day. "There is no shame in struggling," she would say. "The shame is in seeing someone struggle and turning away." As they grew older, their children grown with families of their own, Thomas and Virginia remained as devoted to each other as ever. They could often be found on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. The ranch had been passed to James, who managed it with the same integrity his father had shown. The dress shops were now run by Rose and her daughters, a thriving business that employed dozens of women throughout the region. On a warm September evening in 1913, exactly 30 years after that fateful day in the general store, Virginia and Thomas sat in their favorite spot on the porch. They were in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray and their hands marked by years of hard work, but their love remained as strong and true as it had been from the beginning. "You have any regrets?" Virginia asked, a question that had become something of a tradition on their anniversaries. "Not a single one," Thomas replied, as he always did. "You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Virginia said, squeezing his hand. "But perhaps we both needed to walk our own paths before we could walk them together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the yard below. Little Virginia, named for her grandmother, was teaching her younger brother how to sew a button, while James's sons were helping their father with the evening chores. The next generation was growing up with the same values of hard work, kindness, and community that Thomas and Virginia had instilled in their own children. "We built a good life," Thomas observed. "We built a beautiful life," Virginia corrected. "Not because it was easy or because we had everything handed to us, but because we chose each other every single day. Because you saw me when I was at my lowest and decided I was worth helping. Because I recognized that help for what it was, not pity, but genuine care from a genuinely good man. I filled your cupboards without a word because words felt inadequate, Thomas said softly. What do you say to someone who is struggling to maintain their dignity? I thought actions might speak louder. They did, Virginia assured him. They spoke volumes. They said, I see you, I recognize your worth, and I want to help without diminishing you. That is love, even if neither of us knew it yet. As the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas and Virginia sat together as they had for 3 decades. Their lives intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existing without the other. From a chance encounter in a general store to a love that had weathered every storm and celebrated every triumph, they had proven that the smallest act of kindness could blossom into the greatest of loves. Their grandchildren's laughter drifted up from the yard, the sound of family and continuity and love passed down through generations. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and well-maintained. The town of Randsburg bustled in the valley below, grown larger and more modern, but still holding tight to the values of community and mutual support that people like the Turners had championed. Tell me again, Virginia said, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder. Tell you what, my love. Tell me about the day you saw me counting pennies. What were you thinking? Thomas wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. I was thinking that I had never seen someone carry themselves with such dignity in the face of hardship. I was thinking that if I did not do something, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I was thinking that you deserved better than what life had given you, and if I could help make that happen, even in a small way, then I should. But mostly, I think some part of me recognized that you were going to change my life, even if I did not understand how yet. I was so embarrassed, Virginia admitted, counting those pennies over and over, hoping somehow they would multiply. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had been too proud to say out loud. I am glad I was there that day, Thomas said. I am glad Henderson did not extend you credit. I am glad for every circumstance that led us to that moment because it brought us here. To the porch at sunset. To forever, he corrected. They remained there until the stars appeared, twinkling in the vast California sky, holding each other close and counting their blessings instead of pennies. The journey from that desperate day in the general store to this moment of perfect contentment had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had been theirs. Every challenge overcome, every triumph celebrated, every day chosen together had built the foundation of a love that would endure long after they were gone, remembered in the stories told by their children and grandchildren, in the kindnesses they had shown to their community, and in the simple truth that sometimes the best things in life begin with seeing someone truly, completely, and choosing to care. As the night deepened and the ranch settled into quiet, Thomas and Virginia finally rose and went inside, their hands clasped together as they had been for 30 years, walking into tomorrow the same way they had walked through yesterday together, always together, until the very end and beyond.